I have been wanting to make this video ever since the final horn on that Czechia versus Canada game where Czechia scored in the final minute and beat Team Canada, knocking them out of the quarterfinals. What went wrong in this tournament for Canada? Because for me at least, and keep in mind, I'm a little bit younger. I'm 17 years old. I turn 18 in about a month. This was probably the worst tournament I have ever seen a World Junior Team Canada team play. The worst one, by far. By far. Even last year, where they lost in the quarterfinals to Czechia, ironically enough, I thought that was just an upset. I thought that was just a fluke. I thought that was a once in a couple of years thing because, again, upsets happen. And I thought the Canadian team then wasn't as bad as it was now. Well, now that I see this happened, things got to change. And it's not even really just on the players as a whole. And I'm gonna throw some flack at some players here when I get further in this video. But I don't think it's entirely on them. A lot of it is on the people above. The coach, the general managers, all of the people who put this team together, they are at fault. They are at fault for the reason why this tournament, and even the last one, to be honest with you, was a fail. And it's a good thing, in my opinion, that they lost in that quarterfinal game because maybe they'll finally get their heads out of their asses and wake up and make changes. Let's hope. So let's go through the numbers of this tournament, but I do want to also start off with the fact that this tournament was flawed from the start because players like Michael Misa, Carter Yakimchuk, Zane Parik, Beckett Seneca, there's a couple other names that I left off the list, and you guys can comment them down below, but those were also players who were not even invited to the camp. Now, Seneca and Parik, Yakimchuk might have, but I know Seneca and Parik were for sure. They were invited later on, but they were cut anyways. I don't, and it's funny too, because this team struggled to score. Those players are having some of the best offensive seasons in the CHL right now. Yakimchuk, I saw is like second in Defenseman of the Year in the WHL. Parik has been lighting it up. Seneca's having an insane season and is making Pat Verbeek look smart, which he looked smart at the time when we further evaluated it. But regardless, again, this was flawed from the start because you were missing so many offensively talented players. And instead, they tried to go with guys who were more two-way. They could play on the penalty kill, their grit. Didn't work. And I think that, again, as I said, hopefully, now that they've lost, maybe there's going to be changes now and with the way that this team works. Because, again, I don't think it's on the players, but I also think that it's on the people upstairs putting this team together as well. So, going through the overall tournament numbers, I'm going to read a lot of numbers off here, so stay with me. They went 2-2-1 at the tournament. I know it says it differently on the thing, but basically what that means is 2 regulation wins, 0 overtime wins, 1 overtime loss, and then 2 regulation losses. I think is the way that they do it at the World Juniors, but for those who don't really know how that works, just 2-2-1 at this tournament, essentially. We could go game by game with this. We could start off with the game against Finland, where they heavily outshot Finland and only scored 4, which is good. They still won the game, but that's a lot less goals than we've usually seen from a team like Canada, so I was a little bit that's kind of weird. I guess, maybe their Finland goalie played well, and, they still won. The next game to Latvia was where things really started to, there was a lot of questions and a lot of talk about why were some of these players that are having good offensive seasons, by the way, were left off this roster. They lost 3-2 in a shootout to Latvia, and the biggest component of that was the goalie on the other end for Latvia, Felsberg, I think is his name, made 58 saves, I'm pretty sure. And it's going to connect well to something that I'm going to talk about later on in this video, but they couldn't score on him. They got goalied, essentially, is what people were saying after that. And even after that, you could just be like, oh, it's an upset, they got goalied. The next game against Germany, where, by the way, Germany was in a relegation game. Germany was in the relegation game this year. They only put up, I think, 3 goals as well. That is actually insane, and they only had 1 through, the first 30 minutes, which, for a team like Canada, and for a team who scores as much as they do, that's insane. Again, against the USA, they lose 4-1. They take a lot of penalties. I'll get into the penalties in a second. And then, obviously, last night, they lost against Czechia, and, they lost 4-3 and all that. So, again, we'll get into those games more in depth when I get into the underlying numbers. But those were all the games in the tournament, game by game. And overall, just it was a very lackluster tournament offensively by this team. They only scored 13 goals. 13 freaking goals. Now, if they were Latvia, the team that they ironically enough lost to, ignore that. Latvia scored 10. They scored the least amount of any team in this tournament. Canada only scored 3 more than them. If Latvia scored 13, I would have been like, good job. Wow, look at that. You guys don't usually score that often, and good job. You put up 13 goals in 5 games, essentially, which props to Latvia. They are a really likable team. They always have a special place in my heart, 100%. They had 1 less than Slovakia in this tournament. Slovakia had 14 goals in this tournament. They had 1 more than Switzerland and Germany. Again, Germany was in the relegation game. They only had 2 more against Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan scored 11 in the tournament. Like, you only have 1 and 2 more goals than the 2 teams who were playing in relegation in this tournament. That is insane. And I'm going to be honest, I could have went through all the tournaments previously and looked at how many goals Canada scored and the amount of games they've played. This is probably, and I might have said this at the beginning of the video, I've done this in multiple takes, but this might be the worst offensive tournament I have ever seen from Canada since I've been alive. And again, keep in mind, I haven't been alive that long. I've only been alive for almost 18 years. So I've seen 18 World Juniors. But this might be the worst offensively put together and offensively tournament that I've ever seen them do. Seriously, I've never seen them score that less amount of goals. Even last year, when they were losing, they were still winning by insane margins. They had guys who could score. And that was back when Celebrini was on the team and all that stuff. But again, just the scoring was a massive problem. And the other thing is, too, is they had 205 shots. The second most in the tournament. I think only behind, I think it was Czechia that they had. So, again, I also want to say that, too. They had 205 shots. So it's not like they weren't pressuring or they weren't shooting. They weren't getting dominated. They were getting goalied is what I saw some people say in some of the things. But that's the other thing. You have 205 shots in 5 games in the tournament. You only had 13 goals. That kind of tells me that these players and this team couldn't finish. And again, it keeps going back to what happened when people were invited to camp. You're not inviting the top offensive players in the tournament. You're not inviting Seneca, who has an insane season. You're not inviting Peric, who's probably the best offensive defenseman in the entire CHL, maybe even outside of the NHL. Seriously, it all comes back to that, where you couldn't find guys who could finish, and those guys could finish, and you didn't bring them to the tournament. That's on the guys upstairs. Not on the players specifically, because I think these players, they're good. They're still going to be really good NHLers, but you don't surround them with extremely offensive players. And believe me, there are some players on this team who are offensive, who are talented, but it's surprising that they just didn't put anything up. And maybe it's because they didn't have the offensive teammates that were capable. They got all 2-way players who could play defense at the same time, which is good, but at the same time, you need to score. You need to score goals in this tournament. So the other thing that really, and this is what I've seen a ton on social media, is the penalties. Canada took 27 penalties in this tournament. They had, I'll put the list on screen. They had 113 total penalty minutes in the tournament, which was 34 more than Kazakhstan, who was in the relegation game again, by the way, who had 79, I'm pretty sure. And then 36 more than Czechia, who was third. You have so many more penalty minutes. And I see so many people on social media, so many people saying that it's the refs. I get that. I understand that in a way, because the refs played a part in why they lost to Czechia. The one knee-on-knee was a little bit controversial, and the one goal was a little bit controversial. But I'm going to say this. Every team in this tournament had soft calls called on them. Had soft calls on them. No other team came close to what Canada has right now in penalty minutes. 113. And again, the tournament's not over, so maybe a team catches up to them. But 113 to 79. You think that the refs are just biased against Canada? All I've seen is the refs bias for Canada. That's all I ever saw the last 5 years. And again, like, yeah, there's some soft calls in there. Not every call is going to be like, oh, like, oh, it's like perfect. But a lot of them were. A lot of them, especially in the United States game, especially in the game against Czechia, more so in the United States game, where the right call, like the Repkov pushing away Augustine's stick. What are you doing? I've done that before, but I was in middle school when I was doing that crap. Easton Cowan, and I'll get into the players in a little bit here, but I've never seen a player's stock drop that fast in such a short amount of games. Cowan actually was tied for the lead in points on this team, which is insane. Honestly, it's insane. But he had like so many dumb calls. He was very selfish in the game. Even in that shootout attempt against Latvia, that was brutal. Yeah, he had a really bad tournament. The penalties played a big part. And again, I'm going to say this one more time. The refs did play a part in why they did lose. But as well as that, too, this team was undisciplined. And where does that lie on? The coach. The coach, Dave Cameron. Dave Cameron made some horrible decisions this tournament. Even like that goalie interference challenge. The way I saw it, in my opinion, there's some people who thought differently, but I thought that was no goal. Like, I thought that was no goal. And Canada had the momentum where even if it is called no goal, they could come right back with a face-off in the offensive zone and, they would be okay and they could pressure even more. And, maybe later on they still score because they did still score later on. But Cameron decided to challenge that for goalie interference and see if, like it would be called back. And I get the fact that, in the NHL, goalie interference is like night and day. There could be a call that's clearly goalie interference. That's a good goal. There could be a call that is like, clearly not goalie interference, that is no goal. So it really is night and day in the NHL. But that one for me felt like it was no goal. And if the initial call by the refs was no goal, why the hell are you challenging it? Why are you challenging it? Why are you trying? Like, I don't understand that. And then as a result, they are so lucky they didn't score on that power play, Czechia. That Canada is so lucky because I would have eaten them alive in this video if that happened. But thankfully, it was just, Canada killed it off. But it was another waste. It was a waste of a call by Cameron. And then as well as that, too, they take a 5-minute penalty in the first period. They put Gavin McKenna in the penalty box. I was like, what? Like, that didn't make a ton of sense to me. So, yeah, Cameron should be fired. He also, one of the other things that he did, too, was after all of the losses that Canada suffered in this tournament, like against the United States, and even the morning of the game against Czechia, he just canceled their practices. And when he was asked about it, he said the players were tired. And I'm like, what? First off, tired from what? And second, as a coach, you should be able to give them some oomph, and you should be able to, let them do stuff like that. Like, I don't understand. Cameron really made me scratch my head in this tournament, 100%. Looking at some other numbers here, I do want to say the goaltending was not the problem. Carter George had a really good game, really good tournament, I would say. I don't think it was at fault. Maybe he had a couple goals that I was like, I don't know, maybe you should have saved that. But for the most part, I thought he played well. His numbers were really good. He was like 2-0. He had a 1.76 goals against, and he 2 shutouts. So he had a good tournament. Even Jack, Ivan Konek, I think I'm saying that name right, who was the backup goalie, he played against Latvia. He had a good game as well. The goaltending, like usual in Canada, it wasn't the issue. Again, it was the offense. The offense and the undisciplined and the penalties and the coaching, I think all were issues, combined with the fact that they had some calls not go in their favor and that were controversial, and that was the result of why they lost to Czechia in the quarterfinals. That's what went wrong for me. I also do want to mention one more thing. There was no player in the top 30 in scoring for the tournament that was Canadian. That was actually unbelievable when I was looking at the numbers. I was like, seriously? That might be the first time ever. That might be the first time in the history of the World Juniors where no Canadian player is in the top 30 for scoring in the tournament. That I will never wrap my head around that. That is unbelievable. And then there were a couple players who tied for the most points. Braden Yeager and Easton Cowan tied for the most points with 3. Bradley Nadeau had 2 goals, 2 points. Pinelli also had 2 points. Ritchie had 2 points. McKenna had 1. Howe had 1. Luchenko had 1. Catton had 1. So yeah, it was a really limited tournament offensively, as I said. I'm not gonna beat down on any of those players because again, I don't think it's their fault really. These guys were more than capable. I feel like they needed some more offensively touted players to boost them along. So yeah, that's what went wrong for me with Canada. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Again, this might be a controversial video. You might disagree with some of the things that I said because I'm an American. But don't let my national bias get in the way that this was a rough tournament for Canada, because I was speaking that entire video from a unbiased perspective. I could have easily went on here and said that, oh, Canada sucks, their players are garbage, fire their coach and all this and that. But I look at things from a different perspective, considering the fact that, Canada kind of owns us. We only have 7 gold medals in the history of the tournament. So again, I think that hopefully with this tournament, Canada will realize that there are flaws with this team and try and turn things around from this loss, and we'll see where it goes from here. But anyways, leave a like on the video. Please subscribe down below if you're new and you enjoyed the video. But again, that's it for me. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.